25 of them are now looking at settling with the university. Penn State saying that they are very likely to settle with them at some point this week. They have set aside tens of millions of dollars, in fact, upwards of $60 million to settle the claims. Not every one of them actually prepared to settle the cases. 25, yes, but a number of others are looking at still filing, still in negotiations, and then there are others that are deemed just not credible. We're going to talk about this with our John Ziegler. John has been on a number of times with us to discuss issues of Penn State surrounding Jerry Sandusky and the whole sordid situation out there. He joins us on the 84 Lumber Project Professionals Newsline. Good evening and welcome to KDKA.
Robert, always good to speak to you.
So when you heard of this settlement that is being worked out with 25 of these victims, what was your thoughts?
Well, Robert, I thought that I had lost the ability to be outraged or angered by this entire just completely ridiculous story, which, as you know, began in November of 2011, at least from a national standpoint. Mm-hmm. For those that don't remember, I run a website called framingpaterno.com. That's not meant literally, that's meant figuratively. We're not a conspiracy group. And I also interviewed Jerry Sandusky for 3.5 hours from prison and went on the Today Show to discuss it. So I have quite a bit of knowledge about this case, far more than the average news media person does, or maybe any news media person does. And if people really knew, Robert, the facts surrounding several of the cases which were reported on this week, the three key cases that have been reported as either being settled or being very, very close to being settled, they would be stunned by how outrageous Penn State is handling this situation and how really they're giving away money for situations that have nothing to do with Penn State and perhaps are situations where the victims don't even deserve payment and certainly don't deserve the millions of dollars that they're getting. And the whole thing is just incredibly frustrating because no one wants to hear the facts of this case. We've already decided what we think we believe, what we want to believe. Emotion has run rampant, and intellect and facts mean almost nothing. But the facts are on my side on this, and it's not even close.
Why do you think Penn State is willing to settle these 25 cases to the tune of upwards of, $60 million combined if they otherwise didn't think they had to?
Well, Robert, you know the way the world works. You understand the way academia works, and you certainly understand the way government entities work. And what we have here is a perfect storm, where those at Penn State are not dealing with their own money. This is not a corporation whose profit margin is going to be harmed by this. These are not people whose salaries or stock options are going to be harmed by this. They're giving away other people's money. All right, let's be clear about that. And academia, of course, is the most politically correct element of our society, which is already far too politically correct in my view. And political correctness isn't political correctness run amok. This is political correctness run by a freight train down a hill, where nobody wants to be seen. No one is as stupid as I am, Robert, to actually be seen or misperceived as somehow defending a pedophile. That's the fear that everybody has. Mm-hmm. So no one wants to say anything truthful about the alleged victims in this case or the specific ones that were reported on this week. And it's outrageous. And frankly, it's an affront to victims of sexual abuse everywhere. And it's part of the reason why I'm, as you can tell, rather angered by this. But it's mostly an affront to the truth. And frankly, what's really most upsetting from a Penn State perspective, I didn't go to Penn State. I have no connection to Penn State. I went to Georgetown. But if I was a Penn State alum, the thing I'd be most furious about is not only are they giving away our money, they're doing it to cover their own backsides because it was them. It was the members of the Board of Trustees who started this entire fiasco back in November of 2011 when they panicked in the face of media intimidation, and they essentially made a guilty plea on behalf of Joe Paterno and Penn State, and then everything that's happened since then, Robert, has been a domino effect of that first original sin mistake, and it's outrageous.
Isn't there a sense of wisdom, though, in doing this settlement? Because since with the mindset that people have regarding this entire situation, that the idea of going to court and fighting this to persuade jurors that Penn State really isn't responsible when they see and hear the pain of these young men and what they had to endure. Isn't it almost impossible to really come back with a verdict that would be beneficial to Penn State?
When it's not your money and you don't care about the truth, I guess maybe that's the decision you make. But let's take a look real quick at the three cases that were reported on this week. The first settlement was with victim number 5, okay? Now, victim number 5 gets me upset for a couple of very important reasons, and I realize the details here can get mind-numbing. I'll try to make this as simple as possible. Victim number 5, who's getting millions of dollars and who Penn State actually said publicly is getting more money than other victims because his alleged abuse occurred in August of 2001, which is after the Mike McQueary episode. So the alleged rationale is, well, Penn State could have stopped Sandusky at that point, and therefore they're more responsible, and therefore he gets more money. Now, that sounds somewhat plausible if you don't know the facts. But here are the facts, Robert.
Okay.
Victim number 5 testified originally that occurred in 1998. Not in 2001, which, by the way, makes a hell of a lot more sense if you know the entire storyline and the timeline of all of these events like I do, and you've spoken to Jerry Sandusky. I can guarantee you Jerry Sandusky did not bring victim number 5 onto Penn State's campus into a shower after the McQueary episode. I know that. I'm positive of that. And the date was changed by his lawyer. The lawyer changed the date. Why? Because he knew it would be worth millions of dollars, and the prosecution was more than happy to have a date that occurred after the McQueary episode. That date is bogus, and guess what the allegation is? The allegation is he took a shower with Jerry Sandusky. That's the allegation. In fact, victim number 5's allegation was the only one at trial, at Jerry Sandusky's trial, where a victim testified and the jury didn't believe him. What? So here we have a not guilty verdict in his particular case. He's not alleging sex. He changed the date purely to get more money, and he's going to get millions of dollars out.
Okay, well, according to a report that I'm reading here, this is from the Trib, victim 5 testified that he was groped in the university shower in August of 2001 by Sandusky.
Now we're getting into definitions of grope, okay? And by the way, the jury found that not guilty. So talk to the jury about why they came to that determination. The reality is this was not one of the most horrific crimes that Sandusky committed. I'm not saying that, by the way, he shouldn't get some sort of. Penn State has no obligation to this particular person, in my view, because the allegation I don't believe actually happened in 2001. It happened way before Penn State had any clue what Sandusky was. So that's number one. Then we get to Matt Sandusky. All right, Matt Sandusky allegedly is also about to settle his particular case, and this is really rich because Matt Sandusky obviously was Jerry's adopted child for many, many years.
Do me a favor. Hold on, because the time is saying I got to pause here for a moment.
Okay.
We'll get back to that just moments away. John Ziegler is with us. His website, framingpaterno.com. 25 Sandusky victims are looking at settling this week, and not everybody's happy about it. We'll talk more about it moments away. Good evening, I'm Mangino. 25 of Jerry Sandusky's victims are looking at settling with Penn State this week. One of them, at least victim number 5, already doing so. It looks as though another 24 could. There's a total of 31 claims against Penn State, and they vary. One claim has entered litigation. One will file a lawsuit shortly, it's described as. One claimant continues discussions, and 3 are considered not reliable. That is from Michael Rosen, a New York-based attorney that Penn State retained to mediate the settlement discussions. And with us right now, John Ziegler from framingpaterno.com to talk about 3 of the most notable of the cases where settlements are being made. And now you're on to Jerry Sandusky's stepson, adopted son.
Yeah. Matt Sandusky.
Yes.
And this case got an enormous amount of coverage because in the middle of the trial, very close to the end of the trial, Matt Sandusky suddenly announced that he was no longer supporting Jerry and that he, in fact, was a victim and that this was given as the reason by Joe Amendola, Jerry Sandusky's attorney, and by Jerry himself to me in my interview with him from prison as the reason why Jerry did not take the stand in his trial. Now, I think that was a colossal error, not just because of obviously what ended up transpiring with the convictions, but I think the real story of Matt Sandusky could have theoretically been used to Jerry Sandusky's advantage in court, and here's why. First of all, people need to understand that Matt Sandusky was a huge supporter of Jerry Sandusky's, very publicly, and testified to that effect in the grand jury. Then all of a sudden, during the trial, this is incredible, Robert, the first witness, the first victim, takes the stand. That night, Matt comes back with the rest of the family to the house and tells the entire family, five other people have told me the exact same story, that he said to all of them, I could get up on the stand and lie just like that and make a lot of money. That's what he said. A few weeks later, he flipped. Now, what was his allegation? Most people, unfortunately, Robert, in this case, and I understand why it is, everyone presumes, because of the very distorted Mike McQueary story, that every allegation means that Jerry Sandusky raped them or had anal sex or oral sex or something like that. Matt Sandusky's allegation is that one time he thinks, through repressed memory therapy, which is a completely debunked form of therapy that's not even allowed in most courtrooms, he claims that he remembers Jerry when he was an 8 to 10-year-old boy kissing him on the stomach and may have grazed his penis with his hand. That's the allegation, okay? Now, that's worth, even if true, which I don't believe it is, and Matt Sandusky, everything I know about Matt Sandusky is that he is a horrendous person, and that's why he was
horrendous.
He was. But if even it was true, is that worth millions of dollars? No, that's ridiculous. And then, of course, we get to victim number 2, which to me is the heart of this entire case.
Okay.
Because can we talk about victim 2?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, victim 2 is the heart of this entire case, in my view, and why I'm involved in this. Because he is the alleged victim in the Mike McQueary episode, and as you well know, the Mike McQueary episode is everything when it comes to Joe Paterno, which has been my focus in this since day one, because I think Joe Paterno got a raw deal. I think he got railroaded. Here's the story of victim 2, and you can read all about it at our website, framingpaterno.com. In May of 2011, the victim 2, that boy writes a letter to the editor in 2 major newspapers in Pennsylvania in his own name as a 24-year-old married sergeant in the Marine Corps, saying, by the way, interestingly enough, believe Matt Sandusky. Do not believe the victims. Jerry's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And talking about all the amazing things that Jerry did for him for 10 years after the alleged McQueary episode, which at this time we didn't know he was the victim of, okay? We then go to September of that year. Still, this is before the arrests. Jerry Sandusky, there's a voicemail message of Jerry Sandusky returning victim 2's call saying, go ahead and come forward. We have nothing really to hide. That means, you know what, I found out what that meant, which, just as I suspected, victim 2 had been asked by the police to do an interview, probably because of the letters to the editor that he wrote. He told them nothing ever happened. And then on the November 9th, the day Joe Paterno was fired, he came into Joe Amendola's office, and he gave a former FBI-trained investigator, former police officer, FBI-trained investigator, a very lengthy written on-the-record statement, which you can see at our website, saying nothing happened. Mike McQueary is lying. I remember the episode. Jerry asked me if I would talk to Penn State 2 weeks after it occurred, which dovetails perfectly with the story of Tim Curley talking to Jerry Sandusky just after that episode happened. The reality is, then after all this occurs, after Paterno is fired, after Jerry is arrested, after the crap has hit the fan, his attorney, who, by the way, his mother used to work for, and, by the way, represented him in a DUI case earlier that year, gets him to claim he is a victim. I do not believe, Robert, that he has changed his story one iota about what did or did not happen in the shower. And the reason why I know that is because when I went on a Today Show, and you'll probably remember this, Matt Lauer hit me with a statement from his lawyer, and that statement didn't even come close to claiming that I was wrong about what did not occur in the shower that night that Mike McQueary claims he saw something sexual occur. And if you know damn right well that if I was wrong, that would have been specifically mentioned. He is now about to get his whatever it's going to be, several $1 million from Penn State without ever having testified and without the media even ever claiming he's the victim, and they won't tell you his real story, which I just did. That's outrageous, Robert. That's the heart of this entire case.
Going back to the issue surrounding this idea of settling with Penn State, okay, I don't see the huge upside to Penn State to fighting all of these 25 cases. They'll spend that much money easily in defense costs and then ultimate awards, because some of them are going to get awards, because there are those where guilty verdicts were found and that Jerry Sandusky is a pedophile.
Okay.
And there's going to be financial liability. To me, I get the argument, and I got to pause here for news headlines, and we'll get to more of what you had to say in response to this coming up. But to me, it makes sense for Penn State to do exactly what they're doing and moving forward on this, and not try to retry this all over again and then come off as defenders of Jerry Sandusky, because as you mentioned earlier, nobody wants to be a defender of a pedophile. We'll talk more about this, and we'll get to your thoughts as well. 866-391-1020. All right, 10:33. I'm Mangino. Good to have you here tonight. John Ziegler is my guest.
John is a documentary filmmaker, and his website, framingpaterno.com. John, this issue of this settlement, why is it that you are so opposed to Penn State making these settlements? Doesn't it make sense, if nothing else from a business economic standpoint, to settle with these victims of Jerry Sandusky's?
Well, Robert, look, I totally understand your position on this, and I guess it makes some sense in the world in which we're now living, where principle doesn't seem to matter very much. But there's two things for me that I find very upsetting. First of all, many of these settlements, not all, but many of them, and the ones I've just outlined, are not based in the truth. The truth ought to still matter here. Number two, maybe more importantly from Penn State's perspective, Penn State is not culpable here. Penn State is not even close to culpable. The only case where you can even make a remote argument that Penn State had anything to do, based upon the facts of this situation, might be victim number 2, which is the story that I just outlined, where I don't believe that anything actually even happened sexual in the Mike McQuarrie episode, because the victim himself has said in a statement, which you can see at our website, that nothing ever happened, and I don't believe there's any evidence that he's changed his story. But at least Penn State, and Penn State football specifically, was somewhat tangentially aware of his story. Maybe you could argue that victim number 6, which law enforcement found to be unfounded back in 1998, could theoretically have a case, but I would love to go into the details on why that's a bogus claim as well. And it's interesting that victim number 6 is going a different route and appears to be pursuing litigation here, which I would welcome, because I think it would really open people's eyes to what's really going on here. So the short answer to your question, Robert, is, to me, the truth ought to matter. So yes. Justice means something, and Penn State is not to blame here. They're taking blame for all time. History will forever record, Robert, that Penn State, and therefore, ergo, Joe Paterno, Penn State football, everybody else. And oh, by the way, there's a third issue here. There's a trial still to be waged. What about the right?
But there's a difference between criminal conviction, Robert, and civil decisions.
You know the message this is sending. You don't think that the jurors in the Curly, Schultz, and Spanier trial see this as overwhelming evidence in their minds of Penn State accepting culpability for all of this, and that therefore Curly, Schultz, and Spanier must be guilty? Oh, come on. And I don't, by the way, I don't think it's coincidental, and I'm not a conspiracy guy at all, but I do not believe it's coincidental how this is being slowly dragged out. We keep hearing, well, they're close, it's about to happen, it's imminent, all these news stories, and happening exactly at this time period when we're about, in the next couple of months, to be going to trial in the Curly, Spanier, and Schultz situation. I don't believe that's coincidental. I think it is outrageous from the truth standpoint, from a culpability of Penn State's perspective and an unfairness issue with regard to the upcoming trials, and that's why I am dead set against what's happening here. I am not saying that victims that truly were abused and that Penn State really did have something to do with, which, by the way, I'm not sure who those might be, but if you were able to prove that, go ahead. They ought to be paid whatever they can get.
Yeah, but Penn State has already admitted that they're culpable.
Wait a minute, hold on. They've only admitted that through, I'm assuming, unless you're referring to something I'm missing here,
yes,
through the firing of Joe Paterno and essentially the firing of Graham Spanier and the virtual acceptance of the free report, which
yes,
now the Board of Trustees claims they really didn't accept.
Well, what they did accept, I mean, they can go back later and say, no, we really didn't mean exactly that, but they accepted it. They accepted the punishment flat out the way the NCAA brought it about. They are admitting that they are responsible for all of this.
But you do understand, right?
And I don't see a judge that would, I can't imagine a judge that would accept a legal argument that they are not culpable for the whatever financial settlement or winnings would be given to the plaintiffs in this case, that they're really not legitimate defendants.
What is the basis of their culpability? What is the basis of their... First, they had no knowledge that Jerry Sandusky was a pedophile. And, I mean...
That's not what their own report says, and that they accept verbatim.
What, are you talking about the free report?
Yes.
The Penn State Board of Trustees never took a vote on that.
They accepted it, but they accepted it anyway. My goodness, if the university is going to accept the punishment from the NCAA that ultimately, one moment, please, that ultimately is going to cost them far more than the $60 million settlement that they're going to do with these 25 victims. If they accepted that culpability, then how great of a stretch is it to then say, all right, here's another example of how we are financially culpable for all of this that took place.
But you do understand, because I know you understand this, I'm not being sarcastic, you understand that the reason why all of that happened is because they were protecting their own backside from their original mistake in November of 2011. They had every incentive. They basically told Louis Freeh, we need you to find some reason why we fired Joe Paterno. It's basically in his contract. Freeh was not...
But they accepted it, though. And the alternative is to try to argue that, one, these events didn't happen on Penn State property, and that they had no reason to believe it. And the hardest part here is convincing a civil jury that they're not financially liable for this. Not to mention the beating that they would take all over again in the public arena.
Well, there you've put your finger on it, because it's, as from the beginning of the story, this is all about media pressure and media malpractice. If the media was not going to do exactly what you said, and I agree with you, they would get crucified all over again if they did one thing to step up and stand up against these outrageous settlements. Even pro-paternal members of the Board of Trustees have completely lost their guts on this and have decided to vote for it because they don't want to be attacked like I've been attacked as somehow defending Jerry Sandusky or being against the victims. That's not about what this is not what this is about. This is about the truth. This is about historical record. This is about not admitting guilt for something you had nothing to do with. And in many cases, Robert, not all, in many cases, there are people who have absolutely no right to a dime who are going to get millions of dollars that are going to be given away from people who have no accountability for that money whatsoever. That's wrong.
So you're saying that there are those that were victimized by Jerry Sandusky that are entitled to nothing?
I believe that there are those who are in line for their checks from Penn State,
yes,
who have absolutely no right to money from Penn State and probably no right for money from anybody based upon their alleged abuse.
Okay, well, keep in mind that there are those that are trying to claim that they should be getting money. In fact, according to this story I have in front of me, there are 3 that are considered not reliable that looks as though they're not going to be getting anything from Penn State.
Can you imagine how horrendous those claims must be under these circumstances for them to be thrown out? I am told that at least one of the claims was nothing more than many years ago, Jerry Sandusky threw me into a pool, and I felt weird about it. I mean, that's where we're going with this. I mean, it's free money, Robert.
Yes.
There's no accountability. I mean, no questions asked. Your name doesn't even get printed in the paper. I get crucified when I'm even talking about the name of victim number 2, who made himself a public figure when he wrote those letters to the editor in his own name. I mean, the reality is that the political correctness surrounding all this has made defending the truth impossible. And the truth ought to still matter.
Then if you're right that it makes defending the truth impossible, isn't it the wise, prudent thing then, for that reason alone, for Penn State to settle this and then to move on? Because here's where we are at this point. Those that want to hate on Penn State and Joe Paterno primarily are going to do so in spite of everything. No matter what happens, they will. Those who are defenders will defend in spite of everything, and they will. It seems to me as though the best thing for the university to do is to settle. There are those who were legitimate victims. They were found to be victims in a trial of Jerry Sandusky. I have a hard time believing that a civil jury is not going to come back with major awards to the victims from Penn State, considering that Penn State has already legally accepted legal responsibility for this. It just makes sense to me to do it this way.
Robert, and as I've already stated, I understand that perspective. I guess I'm a dinosaur in that I believe the truth and justice actually ought to mean something. And I truly do believe that what's happening here, and I think this is a concerted effort by those at Penn State to do this, is to pollute the historical record forever. Because I think they know they screwed up, Robert. I think they know they were wrong in firing Joe Paterno, and they're near the finish line. If they can cement this forever, their past mistake will only be believed to be a mistake by a small minority of people who actually took the time and effort.
But even if they were to fight this, John, even if they were to fight this and then lose in court, which they almost undoubtedly would on countless examples of them, then they still, what you are hoping for doesn't come about.
Well, wait a minute. What would be the problem if, let's say, victim 2? Why would they not? Since victim 2 is the heart of the whole case, let's take this one to court. Let's take a look and tell people the story of victim 2 and how numerous times publicly you said nothing happened and you didn't even testify at the trial. If Penn State was remotely interested in defending itself and remotely interested in the historical record or the truth here, they would take that one to court first. And if they lost, guess what? Then they can settle with everybody else.
Can you imagine how bad it would be at that point? How bad Penn State would look at that point, that they went through this litigation process and then they re-victimized the victim all over again.
Oh, come on. See,
it would be even worse for Penn State at that point. I mean,
so you think that someone ought to be able to claim that no abuse ever occurred, not testify at trial, and then suddenly turn into a victim, by the way, disappear during the entire trial so that you never have to undergo cross-examination, then suddenly pop up and say, I'm a victim, give me money, and they ought to get millions of dollars when the entire history of the university has been destroyed and a great man, Joe Paterno's entire legacy was destroyed because of an incident allegedly involving this particular person?
Do you realize, come on, John, you also realize that there are countless settlements that are made every year, not in the sense of truth, but in, you know what, it's expedient.
Right.
And I think that Penn State is doing the very thing that it is expedient. One, it's right to, when you already admit legal culpability, and they have, to then give those individuals the money that you already willingly admit as a university that you're at fault for. Not entirely, but you're at fault for. They've already done that. So then you do the right thing and then grant some money because they're legitimate victims, others because it's politically expedient to do so. What would you say to people that would suggest that by having this conversation tonight, you're re-victimizing people all over again?
That's ridiculous.
Why is that ridiculous?
Because first of all, I've only mentioned one name. That's Matt Sandusky, and I'll argue anybody to the death about Matt Sandusky and whether or not he's a good person and whether or not he deserves a dime from any of this and whether he's lying or not. So I have zero consciousness of guilt about making Matt Sandusky the most remote bit uncomfortable. I've not mentioned victim number two's name, even though victim number two made himself a public figure. I know all the names of almost all the names of these victims that went to trial, and I don't say their names. That is not, you're not being re-victimized. And by the way, the truth matters, Robert. You're in many of these situations.
Well,
people are not the victims that they are being made out to be. Some of them are, but some of them are not.
So are you suggesting that Sandusky is unjustly in prison today?
No. I've said and I've written extensively about this. I have a free book at our website, framingpaterno.com, called The Betrayal of Joe Paterno, with all the details of what I believe.
Yes.
Jerry Sandusky is a pedophile, but I do not believe he was guilty of all of the charges for which he was convicted, and I think there's a strong possibility that the type of pedophile that he was or is has been misperceived by a lot of people. That does not mean that he shouldn't be in prison. That does not mean he's not guilty. That does not mean I'm defending Jerry Sandusky. That means that against my own self-interest, Robert, I have come to this conclusion. Do you think I wanted to come to this conclusion?
Do me a favor. Do me a favor. Hold on, because time's running out on me again here. John Ziegler is with us, documentary filmmaker. The website framingpaterno.com is one you can go to get all the details of what he's talking about tonight, and we'll continue with him moments away. All right, good evening. I'm Mangino. With me, John Ziegler, documentary filmmaker. His website, framingpaterno.com. And we are talking about the settlement offers. It looks as though that Penn State is making with 25 of Jerry Sandusky's victims. Total amount of money that's been set aside to pay off to pay out to the 25 victims, $60 million. And there are still others that are not a part of this and others that are just not viewed as being reliable at all. One of the things that was sent to me, and I want to get your thoughts about this, John. What happened? Wasn't this a smart move by Penn State if there are any guilty verdicts whatsoever against Curley and Schultz in a criminal proceeding?
That's interesting logic, because first of all, there's not going to be guilty verdicts against Curley, Schultz, and Spanier. And interestingly enough, I believe as I said in the last segment, I believe that doing the settlements in this way, as publicly as they are, dragging this out and basically making it as clear as possible to everybody in the world that Penn State is, in fact, guilty, is actually increasing the chances.
Well, this information is not going to be admissible in court.
No, but you know the way that juries work. You understand that they're human beings. They live in Pennsylvania. They're bombarded. How in the world could Curley, Schultz, and Spanier not be guilty if Penn State is essentially stating to the world to the tune of $60 million, yep, we're guilty. Well, it wasn't just victim 2 or victim 6. Yes. It was everybody.
Well, I think there's a likelihood because if George Zimmerman can be found not guilty after what he went through out of Florida by people who were willing to look at just the evidence presented at trial, I think Curley, Schultz, and Spanier can expect the same. But the real exposure, I think there's an interesting argument that Penn State could be receiving. If they are found guilty, then all of a sudden the university could be on the hook for a whole lot more than $60 million. Couldn't they?
Look, the reality is, Robert, that's an interesting theoretical question, but the reality is they're not guilty. There's no evidence that they're guilty. And by the way, there's no logic to their guilt. None. Zero. I can explain that further, but I've done it at my website, framingpaterno.com. I've put out $10,000 to anybody in the media who will bet me on the perjury verdicts in the Curley, Spanier, and Schultz trial. No one will take me up on it, Robert, because they know they will lose.
But there are other charges beyond perjury.
Right, but they're not nearly as major. There's not reporting, which, is actually, believe it or not, a fairly minor offense in Pennsylvania.
What would that mean? Okay, let me ask you this. If not reporting is what they're found guilty on,
right,
what that then exposes the university to on that alone.
Okay,
Because they didn't do anything when they could have done something.
If that happens, which I do not believe would be warranted, and I do not believe would happen, then at least a court of law has determined some level of culpability. But you're pleading guilty to something you're not responsible for. You're using other people's money to make it go away because you don't want the responsibility of having to stand up and being misperceived as defending Jerry Sandusky when all you're really doing is defending the truth. I mean, I get that from a purely practical matter. This is the easy way out.
John, I got 10 seconds. I got to go. John Ziegler, documentary filmmaker, his website, framingpaterno.com. John, good talking to you.
Thank you, Robert.
Have yourself a good evening. As much as he wants to defend the truth and says that he does, I think to a lot of people, he comes off defending Jerry Sandusky. I don't think there's any intention of him to actually do that. But news is next.